A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it got pretty dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It never really bothered me, though. It just made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. So I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd too, as I had never smelled that before around that house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so in the end I just sort of ignored it and went inside. I had just got off shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided that I should just take a shower and call it a night. But I woke up sometime later, sure that I just heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so that he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. So I reached over to my bedside table and I picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone screen and the number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright that I could use it as a flashlight. But through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time that I'd opened the door and stepped inside, though. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one that I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. And I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God that he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up there. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom, and my feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged right back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in the attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down, I think. They were wearing dirty blue jeans, though, with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. And after a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. And that scream was definitely the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put into a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs, though. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic, though, but I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain that I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped though, and I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided that it must be safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing that I noticed though when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped over my bed. I assume in an attempt to find me, but that was the loud noise that I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and I called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs, and the first floor was an absolute mess. But I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books and pictures and knickknacks that I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxed and canned food had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing, and as disturbing as this is, was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil, and an empty pen tube which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So they think that he'd been watching my house for a while. And it was at this stage that I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me that I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep, and I moved a shelf over to block the broken door, and I spent the next couple of hours clearing things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I never did see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and the motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic, and I added a landline up there. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. But nothing else ever happened at that house, though. I lived there, too, for another 3 years, without another incident. One more precaution that I took, though, was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing up into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. And believe it or not, I actually even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I'd been just a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hallway first. So I'm a 23-year-old woman. I live in a townhouse with 2 children, 2 and 6 months old. My fiancé didn't live with us until 2 weeks ago when I caught him trying to mess around with other women and made him move out. That's important to the story as well. I'm a stay-at-home mum though, and when he did live with us, my ex worked evenings. And anyway, let me set the scene. So we live in a tiny town in northern Pennsylvania. My line of townhouses sits in front of a big field that runs to a line of woods. And as far as I'm aware, these woods stretch for at least a few miles, and I'm not aware of any houses in there or any roads that lead through them. But my living room has 3 windows that look to this field, and my bedroom on the 2nd floor only has 1 window that faces that way as well. People do tend to walk their dogs back in the field, and kids sometimes play back there, but I rarely ever see anyone close to my house. For that reason, too, I tend to leave my blinds and curtains open because, well, I guess I just enjoy the view. So, in July of 2019, I was laying in my bed trying to fall asleep one day. All the lights were off, but I had my window and blinds open since it was so warm. I was looking at the window and I noticed a small red and white light just outside of it. I got up and I looked to realize that the lights were coming from a drone. I ran downstairs to where my fiancé at the time was sitting in the living room and ran to the window. I told him what I saw, but of course when he went to look outside, it was gone. I was paranoid that the drone could have had a camera on it or something and someone was watching me with it. So I decided that I would keep my blinds closed for a while after that. Fast forward to January of this year though, I guess that I stupidly got comfortable and assumed that whoever it was flying the drone was just a one-time creep. My blinds were open and I had just gotten out of the shower. I was sitting on my bed pretty much butt naked except for my underwear, scrolling on my phone when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw lights again out of the dark window. It was that damn drone again. So I ran out of the room and waited for a few minutes. I peeked back into my room and it was gone, I guess. I quickly shut my blinds though when I got dressed. Honestly though, I felt sick at how stupid I was to leave my window open again, especially when I was practically naked. But now for the really disturbing part. So my 2-year-old son and I were out in the field 2 weeks ago, 3 days after I kicked out my boyfriend, and we were just playing ball. I had my 6-month-old strapped to me in a baby carrier, and probably about half an hour after we had been out there, I heard a slight whirring noise coming towards us. I looked up and, sure enough, I saw that damn drone flying towards us. I looked around but didn't see anyone. It stopped right over us. I freaked and grabbed my son and dragged him into the house, looking back at the tree line every so often as we went, because I just knew that they had to be hiding in there somewhere. I went inside, closed the blinds, and I called my mum and told her about the situation. She told me to just keep an eye out, and in the end I just said that I would. My son likes to line his toys up along the windowsill, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to open them just an inch or so. A little while after that, though, we ate some dinner and it was almost dark. I was feeding my 6-month-old and my son was playing. He was standing over by the window, lining up his toys, and he started saying, "Dada, Dada." I assumed that he was missing his father and dismissed him by saying that he was going to see him that weekend. But he just kept saying "Dada" though. I looked up and saw him pointing at the window, under the little gap the blinds didn't cover, and I froze because I remembered that he calls any man with facial hair "Dada" because it reminds him of his father. There was no way that someone would be bold enough to actually come up to my window, not when my neighbors are literally right there, and anyone could see them, right? There aren't any lights back there, so I guess that unless someone actually stepped out of the house, nobody would actually see them. Maybe it was my ex, but he should be at work at that time. I ran to the window either way, and I moved my son. I didn't want to lift the blinds, but honestly, I was sure that it had to be the person who had been creeping on me for the past year with the drone, and I wanted to see who it was. So I pushed the blinds up, and immediately was looking at a man who I definitely had never seen before, crouching in front of me. He was bald with a mustache and a goatee. I have no idea how old he was, but he could have been anywhere from 30 to 50, I would guess. And when he saw me, he just smiled and stood up. I yelled at him and told him to get lost and that I was calling the cops, but he just stood there, smiling at me like some freak. I was about to close the blinds again when he said something that I couldn't hear. I told him to leave again, and he said louder this time, "I just want to talk to you." I shook my head no and yelled the same thing to him. He started slapping his hands on the window, yelling, "No, no, no," over and over. I grabbed my phone, scared that he was going to try and break in. I dialed 911. My kids were crying from the yelling, and I felt on the verge of tears. I told the operator what was going on. The whole time I was on the phone, the man was pounding on my window, screaming now. He was yelling all kinds of nonsense, and I only caught some of it. He said that he'd been watching me for months, that I'm beautiful, that he wants me to come with him. He'll kill my children if I don't. The operator told me to go into my upstairs room and hide until the police arrive. My town doesn't have a police department, so we rely on the state police, and she said that it would be about another 20 minutes, but to stay on the phone with her. The man was practically punching my window now and was just screaming like a maniac. I was about to grab my kids and run upstairs when I then heard somebody else screaming, and the man bolted. I looked and I saw my neighbor and his girlfriend. I opened the window and my neighbor said that he heard the man, so he ran around the building. He said that when the guy heard him, he ran back to the woods and disappeared in the tree line, and they said that they also had called the police. Well, I must have thanked them well over 100 times, and the police arrived 10 minutes later. They did a quick search around the buildings and in the trees, but obviously they didn't find anything. But I've been super paranoid since then, and I stayed at my parents' a few nights after it happened. And I really just don't know why that guy targeted me, or why he waited so long to do something. But boy, am I just happy that my neighbors were there to intervene, because if they hadn't, who knows what would have happened. This happened when I was around 12 years old. It was in the middle of the night at my house. My dad would work the graveyard shift at his work, and since it was the weekend, I had stayed up most of the night, and it must have been somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m., and my dad had told me to lock the doors and go to sleep, which I did. I went to my room and finally went to sleep, but only for about an hour, because at around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking on my back door. It scared me awake, and after taking a few moments to process what I heard, I decided that it was probably just my dad knocking on the door, and maybe he just forgot something. Me being really exhausted, I knew that he had a house key on him, so I just told myself that he would unlock the door himself. But the knocking continued. It was pretty creepy, and then the next thing I knew, the knocking stopped. And then it started again, but this time at a different location, which meant that someone was knocking on the window in my kitchen. I continued to reassure myself that it was just my dad. I didn't understand why he couldn't just unlock the door himself. He always had a key on him. I felt pretty freaked out though, so I wasn't answering the door. If anything, my dad would call me to open the door on my phone, which was next to me anyway. The knocking started again at another window. I was terrified now, too scared to get up and check who was out there. The knocking wasn't stopping though, and the next thing that I know, the knocking moved next to my front door, at a harsher level too. And that was when it hit me that I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't scream or talk or move any muscles. My heart was dropping as the knocking moved to another window, closer and closer to my bedroom window where my curtains were see-through. I still couldn't move though. I didn't know what to do or say. I could only stay out as my fear consumed me. I moved my eyes over to the window, and then my heart stopped when I saw a man peering through my window. A tall man with a dark ski mask on. I could hardly make out the details because it was so dark, but I think his mask had some sort of a skeleton design on it. He tilted his head slightly. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. So I closed my eyes hard and started telling myself it's not real over and over again. I opened my eyes and nobody's there. I sighed in relief until I heard a loud whisper tell me, "I'll cut you." Everything suddenly stopped. I couldn't move again not long after this. I really couldn't sleep anymore that night, obviously. It didn't feel like a dream anymore. I've never experienced sleep paralysis before either, and everything just felt so real. The strange thing too is that I really don't remember what happened that night, but I pray that I'll never have to experience anything like that again. It was one of the most frightening moments in my life that I've ever had to deal with, and I think it was real, but I don't know, I'm not too sure. I was home alone that day, so nobody could really back me up, but the following morning I asked my dad when he came back from work if he came back earlier that day and knocked on my doors and windows, and obviously he didn't.